It's gonna be totally awesome.
Here's the chair I'm going to reupholster. I'm doing several, but I've done the first one. So there's the before, and here is the after. So then I really liked the fabric, and I thought I have these chipboard discs that I have kicking around in my stamp room, and I thought, why couldn't I take the circle that's on the fabric and make some coasters to go with my table? And then when people are paper crafting in my room, we don't have to worry about beverages perspiring and getting our paper all wet. So what I'm going to do, I cut these circles out from the fabric, and they're like just the right size for these paper coasters that I already have. This is the sort of thing you'll find in a bar or restaurant, so the next time you're at the bar, save your little pieces of paper that your drink's coming on. And what I did is I found the center of each circle and I poked it with a straight pin. And basically, if you pull that back a bit, if you put your fabric right on the middle of that, and then from the back side, push your straight pin through the coaster, through the fabric, and that just sort of holds your fabric in place so it's not going to wiggle on you as you do the next steps. Then we're going to be using Mod Podge. I'm using the matte finish with a foam brush, and what I'm going to do is just lift up half and swipe that across. And I just want a nice thin layer, not too thick. You don't need it oozing out, just enough to hold it down there. Make sure you go right off your edges so that your adhesive comes all the way to the edges. Just lay that back down, and you can just kind of tap it with your fingers. Turn it around. And we're just going to lift up the other side. Get some more Mod Podge. Smooth it out again. Make sure you're off the edges, and put that one down. So then you can wiggle it a little bit if you have to bring it to the edges. And then from the other side, you're going to go ahead and take your pin out, and then you can lay it on a clean surface and just finger press that to make sure it's going to adhere. And that's it. So I've made all of these already. And what I'll do once the original adhesive has set up is I'll come back and put another adhesive Mod Podge over top. And this is going to give it a nice finish that's going to be waterproof for my beverages. It's going to protect the fabric, so it's going to remain looking nice all the time. And again, you just want a nice thin coat. Make sure you're all the way off the edges, and then you'll just set that aside to dry. There. Doesn't look like much, but come back in a few hours and it'll be all done. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Hey there, fancy pants.
Hi. The last video, I showed you how to make these fabric-covered coasters for your craft room. Now I want to show you how to do them with paper. This is one using Stampin' Up's Designer Series paper, and I love the paper because this is actually the inspiration for my whole new stamp room. So the difference is, this time I had used scissors to cut the circles. This time I used the die to cut the paper, and the die is just slightly smaller than the original paper coaster size. So that's why I had to bring in this finished edge. But I'm going to show you how to do that too. So stick with me. First off, we're going to cut our die circle. And what I'm going to do is just lay my Designer Series paper right down on the cutting plate. Simply put my die down. And these are clear dies, so you can see exactly where you're going. On this pattern paper, I wanted this right in the middle, so that was so cool that I could see right through the paper. Okay, so I'm going to put my Designer Series paper straight down on the first cutting mat, and then I bring my circle die. Be sure that you are going to include the entire die on your paper, because here's what I did before, and this is what you don't want to do. I ended up with a flat edge. So make sure, that's what's cool about these see-through dies. You can see exactly where you're going, so there's, should be no room for error. The other thing is that you can take advantage of not wasting paper or fabric, because you can see through, you can maximize that. So let's just put on our second cutting plate, and we'll go ahead and wheel it through our Big Shot die cutting machine. Then here's our die. Poke that hole. There's your perfect circle. How cool is that? So easy. Okay, so stay tuned. I'm going to show you how to finish it off.
Play the songs that make us dance. Play the tunes that make the ladies swoon.
Okay, so I'm going to show you how to put the finishing touches on this coaster. So what I'm doing is I'm starting with my blank one, and I'm using Stampin' Up craft ink. And I like the craft ink versus classic dye ink because it's a really full-bodied ink and it won't fade when it's out in the light. So just pop that top off. And what I'm doing with the coaster is I'm just going to ink up this edge. So I can basically just drag this around the circumference. And then remember, I only need to do the outside edge because, of course, the paper is going to cover the rest of it. So we're just dragging that across. Make sure you get it all the way to the edge. And then I would even do this edge so that you don't see that white paper. And I wanted to tell you too that the only reason I didn't do the fabric on the die cut machine was because I was being particular and I wanted it to go all the way to the outside edge of the coaster. But truly, that Big Shot die cutting machine, it'll cut light metal, it'll cut light wood, it'll certainly cut the fabric, it'll do all kinds of things. Actually, I want to use that same die to make a quilt. I'll show you that some other time. Okay, so we'll just do that. Now you're going to have to set this aside for a few minutes to dry. So by the magic of television, of course, I have one that's already dry. So with it, so let it, just let it dry for like 5 minutes or so, because it's not classic ink. Classic ink dries immediately. Craft ink takes a few minutes to dry. So then we're going to take our Mod Podge, and what I use to work on my Mod Podge is this piece of vinyl, which is actually the old seat cover of the chairs that I reupholstered. And I'm finding it's great to do with this Mod Podge because it kind of dries up nice and smooth. So what I'm going to do this time, instead of taking the Mod Podge all the way to the edge like I did last time, I'm only going to do it pretty much through the middle. And again, you don't want it too thick because you don't want it to show bubbles through your paper. So I'm doing everything but the outside edge. And then when I bring my paper in this case, I'm going to do just the edge. So this will basically make sure that the whole thing is done then. And you can just spin that around to make sure you get all those edges. And again, just nice and smooth, not too heavy. Okay? And then, of course, when you bring it to your coaster, just remember that you are going to be showing that little edge. And just try to make sure that it's even all the way around. It's going to slide a little bit because that Mod Podge is wet. Just get it where you want it and just kind of lightly press it out as best you can. And I would, certainly make sure you have clean fingers on there. That's it. You're done. So the next stage is going to be just putting a finishing top coat on, and I'll show you how I finished off the fabric one too. Okay, that'll be it. Okay, so now to finish it off, we're just going to take the Mod Podge, and just like the fabric coaster, we're going to just lay down a nice smooth layer of Mod Podge. And this is going to do a couple of things. It gives you a nice protective finish. It's going to bond the paper to the coaster because remember, it doesn't go all the way to the edge, so it's a little bit different application here. And I can see where that edge is, so I just want to make sure I bond the paper to the coaster. Get a tiny bit more here. Remember, a nice thin layer. See how in here, I just want to make sure I get a nice seal there. It's like when you're making pie crust, you want to make sure the bottom and the top sealed together so it doesn't ooze out. Well, we want to make sure we get a nice seal so that it stays together. Okay. So then the last thing is going to be just, what this looks like dry and what you need to do to just get a nice smooth finish.
A song for all the lonely hearts, shattered dreams and broken parts. Feels like sunny days are coming soon.
Okay, so here are our finished coasters, and I'm just going to show you the last little touch that you need to do. I find that on the paper coasters, they're a pretty nice smooth finish. You might find that you want to put a second coat of Mod Podge on just to take away if you see brush marks. You can also use a wider foam brush than I used, but there might be a few little brush marks. If you're putting a second coat on, just go the opposite way of what those are. But what you need to do for any fabric ones, at least the fabric that I'm using, there is a little bit of sort of a grit on top of it, I find. So what I did is I took a little sanding sponge. You can get these, lots of companies have them. Stampin' Up has them. Canadian Tire has them. Anyway, and you're just going to take that and scrub your edges a little bit, but it's the top part that seems to have a little bit of grit on it. So if you just sort of scrape away at it, and that's it. It just gives you that smooth finish. Now, if you want to take just a damp rag, not a wet rag, just a damp rag, and just wipe away any dust, and then you're done. Now, one last thing on the paper coasters. Remember on the, on the paper coasters here, I had done the edge as well. On this one, I had not. So I would just go ahead, and with my craft ink again, I had gone through and did the edges because I didn't do that. Now in retrospect, if I was doing this over again, I would ink up the edges at this stage before you do the paper, the fabric. So ink your edges and then put your fabric on if you're going all the way to the edge with it. Okay, that's it. Thanks for coming over. Thanks for visiting. Come on back and see me again. Bye.